Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this special national tutoring campaign. And this is brought to you by Africa Teen Geeks with our sponsors, together with the Department of Basic Education. I am your facilitator and your teacher for this session. My name is Alistair Gabriel, and this is the fourth session in the grade 11 curriculum, which we are using to help you prepare for the final exams 2021. So far, we've been studying a very important section in grade 11 known as character handling, or some also known as string manipulation. And in this area, we teach you how to actually manipulate characters and strings. When users enter data, most of your grade 10 syllabus, you would have been working with numbers, integers, and then, of course, real numbers, which allow for the decimals. And so only when we get into grade 11 do we teach you how to manipulate characters, strings, letters, alphabets, special characters. And of course, this is a lot more complex than just working with numbers. And there's a lot of testing in this area in grade 11 as well as grade 12. It's expected to make up approximately 35, a third of your exam paper. So let's get into it. So far, we have studied how to manipulate strings in our first session. In our second session, we taught you a process called extraction. When we take a string, which is a variable in which the user has entered some data and the data contains letters, numbers, and characters. And what we can do is we can extract any part of that character that we choose using some special function. So that's a very, very special thing that always gets tested, and that always gets tested in grade 12 as well. So you must master that when you're in grade 11, because you will not be able to escape extraction. The three main functions that are used to do extraction is the copy function, the pause function, and the delete function. We would have covered that with you in our last session, or session 3. And if you've forgotten, please make sure you do master that. There is the recording of that session available. So have a look at it and make sure that you are able to do extraction. Today's lesson focuses on something known as code generation. Now, what is code generating? Now, code generating happens when people have, maybe, here's an example. You join a university or a school or any institution, and because that institution has a large number of people and people might have the same names and surnames and things like that, they identify you by a particular code. In a university, you might have something called a student number. In schools, you might have an admission number, and that number is assigned to you by the institution, by the school, by the university. And it's done by using a computer program, much like what we're going to write up today. And the university decides how they are going to assign that. If it's a big institution, it has to be a big number. Remember, no two people are supposed to have the same code, and that kind of thing. So that's what we mean by code generating, when we use a computer program to actually auto-generate some code that is assigned to some person or some entity. So, and this is also an important algorithm. It works in a standard way, and very commonly tested in grade 11 and grade 12. So let's jump into it, code generation. Now, when you are using code generating, usually the code is made up of bits and pieces of strings that have come from some form that the applicant has filled in. And we're going to do something similar in today's lesson. And of course, if you remember our lesson on extraction last week, you'll see that the copy function is a pivotal function when it comes to extracting. The best function to use to extract. There are other ways to extract, maybe more complex ways to extract bits and pieces out of a string, but the copy function is the most simple. Now, we already went through this function and we already used it, but I want to just quickly gloss over it again, just so that we remember. And if anybody is watching this video for the first time, without having seen the others, we will give you a chance to catch up to the copy function. So here is the function, and you can see that there are a number of ways in which the function can be used. In the first example, and I'm going to put my mouse over it now, First, we are using a string. Now, this is a string variable, and it is storing the characters School of Excellence. Remember from our first lesson, a string variable can have a maximum of how many? Do you remember? 256 characters, which is quite a lot. And if you look at this is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the spaces are counted 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. School of Excellence takes only 20 characters of the 256 characters that we can store in a string. So there is a lot for storage, but School of Excellence will be the example that we're using today. Now, see what happens when you say, and we're creating another variable. Now, also remember, when you use the copy function, it is a function. So it returns a result. What does it return? It returns a piece or a part of the complete string. So the original string is School of Excellence, but we can use the copy function to pull out pieces of that. This example says copy, and the first thing you put in the copy function is the name of the original string that you want to take pieces out of. Then the next number is the starting point where you want to begin copying from. And of course, the last one is how many characters you want to copy. So this is saying copy from the string school, start from position 1 and copy out 6 characters. So let's go and have a look at that. We mean start from 1 and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is from the S to the L, and it extracts the whole word school, as you can see on the right-hand side. And this is going to get stored into this variable called S part 1. In this case, we are now starting from 11 and taking 5 characters, and you'll see that E is the 11th space, and we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going to copy out those 5 characters, which happens to be the word Excel. The last one is a very, very interesting use of the copy function, because if you compare it to the other two, you will see that while these copy functions have 3 arguments, we also call them parameters. The values that you put in any function's bracket is known as an argument, or it is known as a parameter. So while the copy function in these 2 examples have 3 parameters, in this example, it has only 2. Now, what happens if you leave out the last parameter? Remember, the last one meant how many letters to copy. So we are saying here, copy from this string, start from position 11, and we're not giving how many characters to copy. What does it do then? Well, if you use the copy function like this, it means that you want to start at this position and you want to copy all the way to the end. So when you don't give the number of characters, you are instructing the computer to start from this place, but copy until you get to the end of the string. Pretty useful if you know you want to copy something that is the second half of the string. And that, in a nutshell, is the copy function. Okay, so we're going to need the copy function in this lesson, as we used previously to do the extraction and to do code generation. But I just want to also briefly put some other skills that you will require that we have covered previously, and that you would also have to know before getting into this particular code generation. First, you have to be able to, we're going to learn how to enable components. We'll talk about that when we actually have the program with us. Next, we're going to teach you how to work with a radio button group. Some students do get confused with a radio button group. So we're going to look at how we can iron out the confusion of what a radio button group is. You know what a radio button is, but a radio button group is something a little different. Okay, then we're going to learn how to extract parts of a string, which we've also covered last week, and I just briefly went through that again, and we're going to use the copy function to do that extraction. Then next, we're going to use decision structures. And of course, that's taught you in grade 10, and the decision structure, if you remember, is an if-then structure, or you could use it with an if-then-else structure in Delphi. And lastly, of course, we're going to be teaching you the whole point of today's lesson, generating codes. Okay, so let's get with it. We are going to use an interface, and I'm going to show you the interface in a short moment. But this interface has 2 buttons. It has a validate button. And in the validate button, we are going to make a panel visible when a valid ID is entered. A valid ID must be exactly 13 characters. Now, these 3 things may not make sense to you without the interface. So I'm going to switch now to the interface, which is this thing. Okay, so let's see if I can put them side by side on my screen so that we can work with both of them and we can talk about these two things. Okay, so here is our interface. Now you'll see on this interface, let me just get a little bit more space in here. Right, now if you look at this interface, you'll see that it's the user, there's some edits there, and this is some area where the user will have to enter some information. We want his first name, which he will enter there. We want his surname, which he will enter there. And we will want an ID number, which he will enter there. Now, can you see this button here? That is a validate button. The slide on the left-hand side of the screen, this is the button that we are talking about to write code for. So let's see if it makes sense now. Write code for the validate button that makes the panel code generation visible when a valid ID is entered. Now, can you see this, what's highlighted here? That is a panel, remember? Can you see the name? It says panel code generation. That's the name of this panel. Now, you'll see in your exams, they will always put panels with other, other components on the panel. Let's look in here. This panel has this is the radio button group. Can you see it? It's called RPG gender. That's the name of this button group. This is a button called generate code. The button has not been named. And this, of course, is a TEdit. The edit has been named. It's called edit code. And all of these components are on this panel, which is called panel code gen. Now I'm going to run the program, and you're going to see that you won't see this panel. A special code has been written to hide that panel when we run the program. Okay, so I press the play button, and you can see that the panel is not visible. It has been hidden by the programmer. So we enter our name, we enter our surname, and we enter an ID number. And what the question wants us to do is they want us to press this button here. Can you see? You must validate the ID first for this button, for this to appear. Okay, so anyway, I was testing that, and I actually need to go back to that code and take out this code to make the button visible. Okay, well, let's not take it out. Let's just, we'll just hide it for now so that it doesn't make it visible. Okay, now let's run our program and have a look at how that works. Because that was a blank ID, and we don't want anything to happen on a blank ID. Okay, so now here's the ID number. When we click validate, it is supposed to put that button back, as long as the ID number is valid. Okay. And that's my antivirus software, having fun with my computer. Right, let's close that. We already ran it. Okay, so let's snap that to the right again, and let's have a look at, okay, can I grab this, please? Okay, now let's look at what they want us to do. They said we must make the panel visible when a valid ID is entered. A valid ID must be exactly 13 characters. So, and we know that our ID numbers all have 13 characters. So we will now, let's maximize the screen so we can see everything that we are doing. And I just want to activate our object inspector on the left. Okay, now you remember how we use a button. In the exams, you're simply going to double click on the button and it'll take you to the code for the button. The examiner would already have some code there with the number of the question and so on. And you can write your code in the correct space. So this is the button. As you can see, there's nothing there except for this commented code that I put in there. And what we're going to have to do now, let's go back to the design, is we're going to have to extract just the ID number for now and validate the ID number. Okay, now, also in our first and our second lessons, we taught you how to, and you would have done this in grade 10 as well, how to extract data from a TEdit. So we're going to have to create a variable. So we'll go up here and we will make a variable and let's call it SID, meaning, and remember, we always put the letter S in front of any name of a string variable that we make. So we're going to say that that's SID, which is his ID number. And of course, as much as an ID number is all digits, we're going to extract it as a string. It is much more complicated to work with 13 digits. It's easier to work with 13 strings. That's why we're studying the section called string manipulation. Okay, now in SID, we want to store or we want to extract from the TEdit. Again, we have done this in grade 10. When we name our components, we always have a special prefix for all of them. The TEdits usually use the letters EDT. So you can type EDT on your keyboard. You can press the Control key and the spacebar key, and it will give you a list of all the TEdits on your interface. And you must be able to select the correct one. So we're not wanting the TEdit name. We're not wanting that one. The TEdit called ID is actually storing the ID number, right? And so we press enter there, and it auto-fills that field for us, EDT ID. And how do we extract things from a TEdit? We use TExt. So from the TEdit, it means take whatever the user typed in, store it in our variable called SID. And all we have to do is check if SID is 13 characters. Now, they could have made it more complex. They could have said, since ID numbers are not allowed to have letters, they could have also made us check if ID number shouldn't have any letters in it. That's to make it more complex. But in this one, that hasn't happened. They just want us to check if the ID number is 13 characters. So that is where our decision structure, if you remember our previous slide, we said we will also need a decision structure in this program. So what are we checking for? If the ID, now, we need to know if the ID is 13 characters long. We have already studied a function in our first 2 lessons that it's a string function that tells us how long a character string is. Do you remember the function? It is called, well done, it is called the length function, and I can't type length. Right, so how do we use the length function? We say if length, and we put the string, which is SID. You're not going to put SID text now. That is your TEdit. If the length of SID and is equal to 13, that means you've got a valid ID. Now let's look at it carefully. You don't want to get confused with all the brackets. This bracket here, can you see when I highlight the bracket? Delphi highlights the other bracket that goes with it in blue. That is the 2 brackets for the length function. This bracket is the bracket that we're putting our if condition in. It's always good to put your if condition in a bracket. If this whole thing is equal to 13, that means if the length of the ID is 13, what do we want to do? We want to activate the panel. So now I'm taking that, I had this code in there already. I'm taking out the comment to activate this code, and it says panel code dot visible is assigned the value true. That is one of 2 ways to make a panel visible. But the panel will only be, it's in an if statement. Look at that. If the length of the SID is 13, then panel code dot visible is assigned the value true. That's the only time it will get activated. So let's save. Remember, always a good idea to save all. Click on the save all button first before we run any code. And then we can press the play button and we can test run this code. Okay, so that is my antivirus there. Let me rerun. Okay, here we go. So let's not enter, just to save time, I'm not going to enter a first name and a surname just yet. We're just testing the ID number. So let's enter something that's not a valid ID number, like, okay, that's clearly not 13. Let's click on validate, and it doesn't do anything. We can also add a message there to say, sorry, not a valid ID, to be more user-friendly. That wasn't asked of us, but we'll do it. So let's enter 13 digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, 12, 13. Now that's 13 digits, right? So when we click validate, can you see that the panel appears simply because the ID number of 13 characters has been entered? So that you've done correctly, and you've tested it, and it is working. Let's put an else statement in there. If the length is 13, then do that. Else, that means what if it's not 13? I think in grade 10 you used the show message before. we can just put a show message box there that says, sorry, invalid, please re-enter. So that's an additional useful message, which we can put there. And now we have an if, then, else. If the ID is 13, activate the panel. Otherwise, put a message. And that's much better for the user. He knows now what's happening. So let's put the wrong thing and say validate, and it puts this message, sorry, invalid, please re-enter. Okay. Okay, so that is our validate button working correctly. So now let's go back to our slide. I'll just switch between the two things. Okay, so it says write code for the validate button, and we've done that. Okay, and we didn't put any marks to it, but let's go to the next slide. So the next slide says, extract the first 3 digits of the first name. Okay, so let's do these things one bullet at a time. We need to extract the first 3 digits of the first name. So let's go back to our code, and we are now going to write code for this button, and we're going to generate the code. To generate the code, we need to extract the first 3 digits from the first name. So let's double click on the generate code button, and you'll see this is the generate code button. There is no code in this button. So we will have to make a variable, and let's call this variable S. Let's call it part 1 of the code, meaning the first part, right? And that would be a string. And what are we going to do with this string? We are going to extract the first 3 characters of the first name, but we will need to extract the first name. So we will need a variable to capture the name. So we will say sname, and you've done this before again in grade 10. We just did it now. Capturing things off a TEdit. So this is the name. We say EDT, control spacebar, and the very first option here, EDT name, is the correct one where the name is, and we want to take, we say .text to extract it. Okay, so now part 1 is going to be, and what do they want us to extract? The first 3 characters of the name. So we can use the copy function to do that. We did the copy function also previously, and we say S part 1 assign the value copy from S name, which is, we just extracted the name, which is the first name from the TEdit. And this one is easy. So we start from 1, and we want to copy out the first 3 characters. And that's our copy. Now there is, let's go back to our interface. There is a TEdit here called, let's just check for the name. EDT code. Now that's is the name of this panel where we're going to put the code on. Now it's not, our code is not complete, but we just want to see whether our first extraction is correct. So we can display our result, our incomplete result, and that goes on this component called EDT code. Now we're doing the opposite of what we are doing here. Here we're taking a component and we're extracting the data from the component to the variable. Now we're using the component and we're putting the value of a variable into the component. And what are we putting? We're putting part 1, just to see if our extraction is working. Are we correctly extracting the first 3 characters of the first name? I'm just going to go to my Avast, and I'm going to just disable it because it keeps checking the programs before they are running, and it's kind of just hindering our time. Okay, I don't know why it's not happy with that. Okay, let's run the program. Okay. Oh, it's still doing that. Okay, so we are going to, my apologies, my antivirus software keeps checking when I'm running. Okay, So remember, we've got to have let's put our first name. Let's use my first name. My first name is Alistair. So the first 3 characters that it should extract is Ali. Let's put a valid ID number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh, 11, 12. I put an extra one. Let's click validate. And now it gives me that button. So when I press generate code, can you see there? It gives me ALI, which is Ali. And it's correctly extracting the first 3 characters of my name. So we have done the first bullet. Let's click save. I should have saved before I ran there. It's a bit excited. And when I want to stop here just to give you a piece of advice. When you're writing exams and tests, this is really what we need you to do. As you write significant piece of code, remember to save your program. I have lots of students that write and type and type and try to hold the whole problem. And then something goes wrong, it's very difficult to find errors. And the worst thing that can happen is you have some kind of power failure or some kind of power problem, and you lose everything that you typed. So remember to save at regular intervals, especially after you do anything significant. Now you see, when our program goes wrong, we already know that it can't be this because we worked on this bullet and it's working. And I'll be happy with that code. So when things go wrong later on, we're not going to come back to that code and fiddle there and look for problems because we already tested it. Okay, now the next thing they want us to extract is the age. Now that's an interesting one. That's going to take us some time to work out. We now have to work out the age of a person. Now, the age of a person is based on the person's ID number. And we are going to extract the first 2 characters of the ID number. Remember, the first 6 characters of a person's ID is their date of birth. And the first 2 is the year of the birth. ID numbers don't use 4 characters. For example, if you are born in 1977, like me, then my ID number will start with 77. It will not start with 1977. Similarly, if somebody is born in, like maybe some of the young teenagers of today, born in 2009, your ID number will start with 09. So that is the issue there. The first 2 characters of the ID number is what we need to extract. Now, we've got other problems, but let's just extract first what we would call the year of birth. Now, we're going to have to work with integers to do this one. So let's create a variable called integer variable. So can you see I put the letter I in front of it, and that will be called the year of birth, which will be of the type integer. And I'm going to use the copy function again, and I'm going to leave a space here so we can see the difference between the 2 extractions. I'm going to extract the year of birth, and that is going to be the first 2 characters from the ID. So I'm also going to have to extract the person's ID. So let's just do all our extraction parts here. The ID is going to be, let's put that into a variable called SID. I still want to leave that space to be neat. Right, so the ID is assigned the value, and the ID is the TEdit called edtid. Extract it using .text. Okay, and of course, I haven't created the variable SID. So let's create the variable there. That's for extracting the ID, because we now need to work with that. Remember, we extracted the ID before. Can you see that? But that was in this other button to validate. This is a separate button now, a different button. So we're going to have to extract the ID again a second time. Okay, now we've extracted it. We want to copy from the ID that we've extracted. And we just want the first 2 characters. So we can use the copy function, and we can say start from 1 and copy out the first 2 things. And that will give us the year. That's why I called it year of birth. Right. So for me, my ID is 770227. The first 2 characters are 77. So this line of code is just going to extract the 77. Now we have a secondary problem. How do we work with the person's age from there? That's very tricky, right? Because some people would be born in the 20th century, which means they will have a 19, like me, in front. You, as a grade 11 student, will probably have 0 something or in your ID number, which means you are born in the 21st century. And so your year of birth starts with a 20 or a 20. So before we even try to work out the guy's age, we will have to know whether or not he's born in the 20th century or the 19th century. Now that is tricky. And that's where, as a grade 11 student, you're going to have to, kind of know your logic. Now let's think logically about this. If you are up to, it's the year 2021, right? So if you are 21 years old, or if you are up anything from 0 to 21 years old, you would have been born in the 20th century. That would make you 21. Only if you are older than 21, like I am, 44, then you will you would have a 19 in front of your name. So that's really how we work it out. If the year of birth, if the year of birth is less than 21, if that number that we just extracted is less than 21, then we know that you were born in the 2000s, because that number that we extracted now will be anything from 0 if you're born in the 2000s to 2021 if you were born this year. But mine is 77, and that's greater than 21. And because I'm older than 21, that's how we know that I'm born in the 19th century. So that's the trick. And we're going to say, and watch how we do that with the decision. If the year of birth is less than 21, then that's telling us that you were born in 2000. So let's change the year of birth. Let's not use another variable. We'll say year of birth is assigned the value year of birth plus, and we'll add 2000 to it, right? So if you are less than 21, that means, let's say you're 19, year of birth will be 2000 plus 19, which will give us 2019, which will be the actual year of your birth. Now, if you are not born, if this number we extracted is actually less than 21, then we know that you were born, and I'm going to copy this instead of typing code. Then we know you were born. I did that wrong, and Control V, I had it highlighted. Then we know you were born in the 19th century. So I want you to quickly look at that two pieces of code there. If the year of birth that we just extracted is less than 21, then we know you had to have been born in the year 2000 onwards. So we'll add 2000 to that number. Remember, it's only 2 digits, so we're making it 4 digits. Otherwise, the year of birth, we can add 1900 to it. Now it's very easy to work out your age. Let's create a variable called age. Oh, I'm creating it in the wrong place. This is going to be an integer. Your age is a number, and of course, no decimals. All right, and now let's do the calculation for the age. Let's do it here. Age is assigned the value. You want to help me out? We're going to now take 2021, which is the current year, and we're going to minus year of birth. Right, so we know that it's 2021. We can improve all these things with other functions that, because remember, this program now will only work in 2021. What happens next year? So we can extract the date from the computer using the date functions, but we won't. Let's keep it simple for now. And we'll say the age is 2021, current year, minus now your year of birth. And that is going to give us your correct age. All right. Okay, now let's take this out of there. Okay, we already know part 1 works. So we can delete that. Now let's display on the TEdit to see if everything is okay. EDT and code generation. Okay, actually there's some other problem on this. The text is assigned the value, and we're going to put the age on there. Now we can't just put the age on there because the age is a number. So when we run this program, we're going to get 2 errors. We're going to get an error here. No, not here, there. And we're going to have to display the age, which is a number. So we're going to have to convert. Remember, TEdits can only keep strings. So we want to convert. This is an integer. And in grade 10, you would have learned this important function, integer to string, to convert an integer, which is the age, to a string. The other place we can have the problem is here. we're copying from text, but this is an integer. So now we need to do it the other way around. This is a string, and we want to convert that to an integer. So that brings us to this code. Now let's have a look at everything. First, we're extracting from the ID. We're extracting from the TEdit, we got the ID number. Then we're using the copy function to take only the 2 digits from that number. So we got the year in which he was born. But we need to work out whether it's 2000 or 1900. But we know if that number is less than 21, that means he had to have been born in the 2000s. Otherwise, he's born in 1900. And then once we've got that sorted out, we subtract that value from 2021 to get his age. Okay, so for this code, we need to put a first name. I'll put my first name again. And we need to put a valid ID number. So let's put 770227. I'm just going to make up stuff now. 5019087. I know that's 13 digits. Thank you so much, antivirus software, for being so kind and making me have to do that again. Alistair 770227 5019084. I know that's 13 digits. Okay, so that's when I click the valid button, it's happy. And then I click generate code and it calculates the correct age. Can you see 44? Because I put 77 there. 2021, from 1977 to 2021 is 44 years. Now let's delete that and just put 09 and see what the computer does. Now we know that if someone is born in 09, they must be 12 years old. Am I right? Is that calculation right? Validate. And let's press the code button. And as you can see, it's saying 12. So it is now that button that we've got there, the code that's working out the age is working correctly. So that's the second thing done. So this first part extracts the first 3 characters from the name, and this part extracts the correct age. Now let's go back to our slide. What is the last thing they want us to do? Is they want us to take the last 3 digits of the surname. Now we need to get the surname. So let's go to the next. Let's go back to that button. We haven't finished generating everything. We need to get the surname. And let's create another variable called surname, where we need to extract from. So let's add one there, s surname, and we'll say s surname is assigned the value edt. Now where is the surname stored? It's stored in this TEdit called surname. Okay, so I'm going to go fast through that because we're running out of time, and we have correctly extracted the surname. Now we want the last 3 digits of the surname. So we will call this one, let's call this one part 2. Okay, actually it's part 3. This is the third part of the extraction. We don't have a part 2. We call that instead of calling it part 2, we call it year of birth. So that's fine. Okay, and I need to put an S in front there because it's a string. Okay, so here we are. We're going to go S part 3 is assigned value. And this one's interesting. They want the last 3 letters of the name. And we're going to have to use the length function there. We're going to use copy. And we're going to use the copy function. And we're going to copy from the surname field, S surname. And we're going to start, now this is the tricky business. We're going to start from where? From the length of the surname. And it's not case sensitive, but I just like to be. Now, what is the length of the surname? I want to take us back to our slides. When a name is stored, it's stored like this. Now, we're using Bilbo as an example, right? What is the length of Bilbo in this example? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters. So length of Bilbo is 5. Can you see that the length, if we put the length function in the copy, we are actually going to send the computer all the way to the last thing. That's how we extract the last character. So what if you want the last 2 characters? then send it the length, and then subtract 1, and it'll start from there. They want the last 3 characters. So if we go to the last one and subtract 2, that is how we will actually get the last 3 characters. So that's our clever little trick. We're going to go length of surname, and we're going to subtract 2, and notice that our copy function does not have a third part, because we want it to start from this place and copy all the way to the end, because they said they wanted the last 3 characters of the name. Okay, and of course we need to put a semicolon there. Now let's change this to see if it is actually, we don't need this is a string, so we don't need to test it with a conversion, and we will just say, let's display S part 3, and let's see if that works correctly. So this is the bit on the surname. Right, and our program is running. Okay, it's stuck a bit. Okay, let's close it there. Right, here it is. Okay, I'm not going to type anything under my first name now because we're testing the surname. My surname is Gabriel. I'm going to have to put a valid ID number there. 770. Okay, let me just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have to have a valid ID number for the program to work. Now let's generate code, and can you see it takes IEL, which is the last 3 characters of my name. And we have to put that all together. So we're almost out of time, but we're now going to put all the parts together, and we're simply going to use the add function to put them all together to create the full code. Let's create one more variable, a final variable called S code, and we will say S code, which is a string, is assigned the value part 1, which was the first 3 characters, which was here, the first 3 characters of a person's name. To that, we're going to add their age, but we remember we have to convert it. The age is an integer, so we want to convert that to a string. So we'll take the age of the person, which we worked out in this section. Remember, it was an integer. So let's take that integer, convert it to a string, and add it to part 1, because we're creating the code. And then we will add one more thing, which is part 3. So there's our part 1, our part 2, and our part 3. And that is the whole thing. And if we run it now, all right, here we go. Now let's put of my full details. That's my first name. My surname is Gabriel. My valid ID is 77022750380064. I just made up some numbers there. Validate, it's 13 characters. And let's click generate code. Oh, well, that's silly me. When we display the code, we displayed the wrong thing there. We have to now fix that. We were just testing part 3. Now we want to actually display the correct code. Let's save that. And let's hope we can steal a few minutes of the session to just get through running this program. Alistair is my first name. Gabriel is my surname. Valid ID 770278. Oh no, that's not right. 0227. Okay. My apologies. My computer is my antivirus software is playing around with me. 770228599097. Right, that should be fine. Validate, it's 13. Now let's see what it displays. Ali, which is taking the first 3 characters of my first name. 44, working out my age. And then it's adding the last 3 characters of my surname. And that is the code that is generated for me. You will see also there's a gender button there, and we're out of time. And I was going to show you some interesting things, but we'll pick this up quickly in our next session before we proceed. But this is very much code generation, how you can take bits and pieces of other inputs, use it, put it together, and create a string. This one's interesting because it makes you use some string functions. But of course, we also have this number, and we have to work out the person's age with a little bit of logical calculation there. And that's the code that has been done. I'm just going to let it sit on the screen. So when you're watching this video, you can pause it at this point and you can copy this code into your one. Remember also, yes, and you can create this interface and you can test the code for yourself. So that was code generation. And I want to say thank you very much for watching this video. I hope I didn't go too fast for you, but at this stage, you should have done a lot of code generation at grade 11. And yes, that's the end of our session. We're going to pick it up again next week. So please spread the word. Let people know we are doing this to help you with your exams. And we're going to start looking at text files. And text files also is an important section, part of character handling, and it also carries some marks. So with that, I want to say thank you for sharing with us today. All the best to you in your exams. And good day from me and Africa Teen Geeks and the Department of Education. Goodbye.